have been working on this piece right here that I'll turn it down and show you a little bit of. This piece right here. And this is a table or a stump stool. You can't really see much of the green in it because this is green ash and it's super white. So it's, you know, it's just kind of hard to see the detail. It's got a lot of detail in the figure. I did that on purpose. The detail is not very deep. So what I'm having to do is I'm having to go back and I am having to, what's it called? Sand this with my sander, my palm sander, and try to get out some of this rough stuff because I've had to use a few different tools on this to make this happen. So real quick, let's go over a process step by step a little bit on this. That way you guys can know what I did and kind of see what's going on with it, what it takes. So that's kind of in line with what I talked about in the title of this, and also what I wanted to mention to you folks about the educating your potential clients or whatever. The reality of it is that you only have a few kinds of people that are going to buy art in general. And this really applies through all art. It does apply in different levels or different categories, I guess, depending on the kind of art. So like wall art, like paintings and whatnot, versus sculptures, or even standalone sculptures versus wall art or whatnot, or furniture or whatever. So the reality of it is that the average person doesn't really know what it takes to make something. And honestly, it really doesn't matter to a whole lot of degree for us as artists, because, you know, we should be charging basically for the days that we're not selling stuff and the time that it takes to make it, plus the time that a piece sits in a gallery or whatever online or whatnot to sell. So there's that. But at the same time, educating people can help a little bit. So it's kind of weird because there are perspectives about art that are a bit strange to outsiders. Most artists love art, but they're not going to have the money to buy art. So even though they may understand and really appreciate your work, they're probably not going to be your biggest seller. So they may understand and know, but that doesn't really matter in the scheme of things. What really matters is, does the average person understand what you're doing, or do they have some kind of connection to it, right? Like, do they have some kind of comprehension of value to it? And sometimes that's just purely emotional. Sometimes people just see something and they just love it. Other times it takes a little bit of them understanding what processes you went through to make that happen, right? So those are kind of the things that you want to educate your clientele on. When I get the chance, I always explain what it takes to make my art, because for instance, if I can stand this guy up real quick, he's heavy, almost 100 pounds. Yeah. So if I can stand this up a little bit, I don't know if you guys can see the textures in this at all or not, but this is not smooth. This has a lot of texture. Now, one of the challenges that I face with this kind of stuff is I love the organic shapes, and I love like just smooth contours and things like that. Unfortunately, what can happen and has happened to me is that people make statements like, well, he just sanded a log and that's how it came out. And so they think there's like no effort put into it. And once again, really it shouldn't matter about how much time you've spent on something. It really matters more about how much effort, how much time you're dedicating to your craft, because they're not paying for the piece itself. They're paying for all the time you haven't sold pieces, all the time that you've been practicing. That's what they're buying. And if they can't understand that, then they're probably not your client. That's why underselling is really a dangerous thing to do. It can help to price low at times to be able to, you know, talk about like to get your name out there a little bit and get a few people following, especially if they write reviews for you or whatever. But you've just got to be careful because you can also lock yourself into just not getting paid for your art. Once again, this side is the same. It's got these ripples in it that I created. And what's interesting is that these easily can be misinterpreted as natural texture, and they're not. I created them. They're subtle, but they're something I created, and it's in contrast to these sides that I flattened. Oops, got splinters because I haven't finished the sanding process. So these are like super smooth surfaces, took a long time to make. And these are rippled surfaces, which took a long time to make. And therefore, it could be misunderstood and misinterpreted as being just, well, he just sanded a stool or a stump and that was it. Well, okay, that's true. And if that's as far as they're going to go with the conversation, and you will hear that at art shows and even at galleries, I've had people like, I've heard them say things like, oh, that's cute, but that must not have taken that much time to make, or that wasn't that hard to make. They really don't know, but they attribute a value to something, right? So on this particular stump, we're going to talk about how I made these real quick and what it actually took to make them. So these were a beautiful, I wouldn't say a mistake, they were a beautiful consequence of a different process that I was trying to make. And that's how these came about. And I liked them, and I felt that it added to the very stark, smooth sides that were broad. So I decided to leave these. Now, I have to go through and sand these without losing them. And that's a challenge. I mean, this is ash wood, so this is a green ash. It's a little bit more dense than some other woods, like the silver poplar, the cottonwoods, and that kind of stuff, or even a sugar maple or something would be much softer, be easier to manage and to carve, sculpt, and then sand, right? But the ash wood in itself just doesn't sand that fast. Even with like 60 grit, it's pretty harsh and pretty hard. So it takes a little bit of time to sand these things. And so I have to go through multiple processes. First off, I went through this and I used my Arbor Tech Turboplane, and I created these kind of like ripples, these waves in it, going horizontally across or perpendicularly across this all the way down. And then once I got those kind of where I wanted them, then I had to go back, because that's kind of it's not abrasive, but it's a very quick rotating force with a scraper blade basically. And so it kind of fuzzes up all this stuff. And so the fibers weren't very smooth. And to knock that down a little bit and to soften some of the shapes and whatever. Oh, sorry guys, I didn't see you commenting. I've got this turned down a little bit. Hey Oliver, how's it going? 17 for live. Hi, how's it going? Good to see you guys. Thank you for stopping by. So I used my DeWalt rotary sander that I've used in other videos, and I came back and I started kind of cutting down some of the sharp edges and smoothing out a little bit of the texture so that it wouldn't be so aggressive and it wouldn't take as long to final sand. I'm doing good, Oliver. Thanks for stopping in and checking out the video. Hopefully the information can be helpful to somebody. So then I'm going back with my Festool ETS 125 Rec, and I am sanding these with 80 grit. Sorry, I was going to say 60. Then I don't know. I said 70 for some reason, but I'm using 80 grit. And this is the the Festool, what is this stuff called? Granat? 80 grit Granat, yeah. I find that on the Festool machine, the Granat works really well. I really like it. I might try some of their what's it called? Their mesh in the future. I don't know, but I'm really satisfied with this. And now I am sanding through here, and I'm having to sand through all these ripples, right? Because there's a ton of ripples. And once again, you don't want the ripples to go away, but you got to sand out all these marks, or at least I want to, because I want it to look super smooth and clean. So that takes a while, especially on ashwood, because once again, ash is very hard. So I'll spend on this piece alone, I've got to go 80, then I go 120, then I go 180, and then I go 220. I will spend a few hours on this. Miguel, inglés o español, no me importa, yo hablo ambos. But the reality is that it takes a while, and people don't realize it. It's a subtle, very subtle texture, and they think it's like just naturally there, or it comes easy, because it's not this like super intense, super dynamic, you know, image in it, or whatever. The reality of it, though, is that they just don't understand how much time that takes. So you're gonna have to charge for what you want, right? But this all comes into the play of the next aspect of all this, right? So the next aspect of all this is the fact that now it's about choice of tools that you've got, right? So yeah, there's a million palm sanders out there that you can use. I have a few different ones. I have a Ryobi that my wife typically uses for her like house projects, and I use for like rough sanding stuff. I have a rigid one, and then I have this Festool one, which you know, if you know anything about Festool, you'll know that they're not cheap. So does it really make a difference buying this one, you know, which is, you know, what is it, maybe 3 times the cost, 4 times the cost of like the Ryobi or the rigid? The rigid is more expensive than the Ryobi for sure, and it is different. Now, I will say that in all of this with tools and things like that, certain tools are just going to be preference, and it's not going to make a ton of difference, right? It's going to be preference. Like if you buy a DeWalt versus a Makita versus a Metabo or something like that, they're all going to be somewhat in the same price range, or the rigid. So you're probably not going to see a ton of difference. What you will notice, though, is just how they feel in your hand, like how big they are and that kind of stuff. All of those companies make good quality products, but do remember, they're really made for mainly construction use, okay? So it's going to be, even their fine sanders are not going to be quite as fine as like you might want them to be, or you might like them to be. And that's what I found. I found that even the higher end sanders of that like big box store level, or those like contractor grade, like DeWalt, what's the one that I have that I like, Makita, all those, you can pay lots of money and only barely get a little bit better of a tool out of them, in my opinion, for finish sanding. So I do know people who make sculptures and furniture who use those tools. It can be done. What I find is that it takes more effort and more sanding to accomplish the same as what it takes me to have this Festool. Now, to be honest, I held off from buying a Festool for a long time, and this is not a pitch for Festool by any means. There's SQ, there's a few others out there. I can't remember the other one. There's a bright yellow one that's really expensive as well, and it does really good work as well. I mean, so if you're looking for like super fine sanding, a really nice finish stuff that you can really finesse and have the attachments like these extra pads that are contour pads and stuff that really work the way that you kind of imagine they would, you're probably going to be looking into the $300 or $400 range for a finish sander. okay? And some of that's going to depend on the size. This is a 5-inch. You can get 6 inches and whatever as well. I can take this contour pad off and do flat surfaces easier and control it more and whatever. If I'm doing live edge or I'm doing these ripples like you see in this, then this contour sander makes a huge difference. But overall, the smooth function of this, just not one of the other sanders that I bought from the big box store has such a smooth function while I'm sanding. It reduces fatigue on my wrist and my arms, but more importantly, it's such a fine sand when it's actually sanding your surface. So while I'm not saying anything bad about like the DeWalt, the Makitas, and they do have higher end sanders and stuff, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other sculptors that I know, and like wood turners and whatever, they seem to be just a little bit more construction oriented. Like the manufacturing of them, the design of them is just a little bit more, it's a little less smooth and a little less fluid in them. And I do find that that makes a difference in the finish, like how much I have to sand, how many times I have to go over something with different kinds of sandpaper. Oftentimes with this, I can skip from like 120 to 220 immediately, and it does fine depending on the wood that I'm working with and how much prep I've done before. And I don't notice any swirls in it. Whereas with the Ryobi that I have, it runs fine and it runs fast, but it almost feels like it spins horizontally more than it goes in the orbital motion. And this one almost feels like it's hard to get it to go like rotationally in a horizontal spin. It almost naturally goes into the orbitals standing easier. And to me, with fine art work, that's a big deal, because that you really want that super finish if you can get it right. So that's one thing to know. But let's move on to something else. Like for the rotating just disc sander that I use the DeWalt, and it's been fine. It's pretty fluid. I do know that the Festool and the Esca or whatever it is makes one that's a bit finer in its rotations. But to me at that point, because that's my rough work, it's not my finish work. It's like the mid-grade work that I do between using the angle grinder and then the finish sander. So I don't really find that it was worth the money to buy something that was $300 or $400 that a $80 one from Home Depot did just fine with, that was DeWalt brand, right? So for me, that wasn't a big deal to pay the money for those because of how I use it. Some people would want to use that as a more of a finish sanding on certain things, and then that might be worth the extra money for the higher end ones. And once again, it's pretty much all about the mechanics of the bearings and how the arbor works in there and that kind of stuff, how much they've really put money into that development. And Festool and these other companies that I'm talking about have been around for a long time. They have really dominated the high-end finishing market for a long time. And there is a reason that they're expensive. One is name, yes, but another aspect of it is just simply they've done the research and development and the investment into this kind of stuff, okay? So they're not for everybody. I don't think everybody, like if I'm gonna go build a house and it's going to be, let's say, a mid-level home, and I'm doing even the finish work for that, for carpentry, probably not going to run around with Festools. I'm probably going to run around with high-end DeWalts or Makitas or something like that, because they will do just fine. And if they get stolen, it's not nearly as much money out of my pocket as a Festool system would be. But there are other times where things, once again, this is all kind of, it's dependent on what's going on in the circumstances, right? So these are like Chinese router bits. These are the Harbor Freight ones, to be specific. So who knows who made these? They probably use various different companies to make their products, I'm sure. And I don't care what Harbor Freight says. I know that they tout like they have these engineers and they're developing the highest quality tools for the cheapest price or whatever. And that may be true because I'm not going to go compare every cheap one out there. But the reality of it is that at some point for the product to be affordable or cheap, it's got to be lesser quality in its make, right? In the manufacturing. So they may have made it the best quality they could for the cheapest price, but that does not mean that it's comparable to a brand such as Freud. I have used Freud for a number of years and still do. And I use these from time to time. These were a kit that I don't know, maybe I bought it for some like construction work in the house or whatever, and I thought I might run through nails. I use these sometimes as like the first passes for reclaimed wood if I'm not sure there's metal or whatever in them, because if they break, they're cheap and I don't care. But I will say that they are not the same quality as a Freud, and you're going to see this in multiple ways. The three ways that I see that this is the most common that you notice, okay, well, really, there's five. Let's just call it five because I know there's five. And one is the price, right? So they're going to be cheaper. So that's one way you're going to notice a difference in them. Two, they may not be as balanced. So I have had some of these that out of the box, they don't spin right. They kind of wobble, and no matter how much you adjust them up inside the collet, they just wobble. And that's part of the risk of buying cheap tools, is that their quality control is not going to be nearly as good. Three, I've noticed that even when they're brand new, the sharpness of them isn't nearly what a good quality like Freud, or, you know, there's a bunch of them out there now. There's all these specialty like bespoke tool companies that make these bits as well. And so yeah, they're not going to be as good a quality, even sharp, as like the higher end stuff is going to be. And Freud is not the best, by the way. It's just a decent one that you can buy easily at most of the big box stores. But once again, like this one might cost me, I don't know, $10, and a Freud is going to cost me like $40 for the same size, same bit. So yeah, you're paying a lot more. Now, another thing that I noticed on these is that you can't cut as fast with them because they aren't as sharp, first off. And second off, they tend to heat up very easily. And that is a true mark of maybe components that are better quality, but components mated with components that aren't. So maybe the carbide blades on these are a decent quality, but the shank and the mass isn't. And the way that they're welded to them, the way that they're soldered on there, is not as good. And so they may be a big heat sink, and when that happens, then the blades start to heat up. And I find that these Harbor Freight ones, they chip out a lot, if you can see that. These I was running on a router sled to flatten the top of this, and it was actually on the other side, but there is a big heart section in here, if you can see that. So this heart section right here, the grain is circular, right? So it goes in different directions very quickly. And when you're going back and forth, it fights these bits, especially on woods like ash and walnut and hickory and, you know, these really dense, extremely hard woods. And so it broke both tips on this one. It broke the tips trying to make a pass through here. I had been using it for a while, so they were probably a little dull, but I hadn't used it honestly enough, in my opinion, that it should have done this. That tells me a couple of things occurred. One, they're not very long lasting for the sharpness like we talked about. And two, the solder is, you know, not a great quality. And then three, the carbide probably isn't a great quality. It microfractured from chattering, and then it split on me. This one did the same thing, only one side split on this one, but it did knock a chunk out. Once again, I checked everything after I did these. This was on the same stump on the other side. I had it flipped over and was flattening the other side. That tells me that, once again, and you can see there's just like heat buildup in these and things, and I was going slow, so just know I wasn't pushing it and hogging it through the wood. I was probably only taking off no more than that 3/16 level, which these should have been able to do even in this ash. The Freuds do it no problem, and they shattered on me. And you know, you could go into the safety and I'm not really worried about the safety. I've never had any of these pieces fly up and like hit me so hard that it was something to be concerned about. But it does, if I can't get through one log, the top, with 2 of these, that's 20 bucks right there. Plus going back to the store to buy more. You know, is it really cheaper in the long run than buying a Freud that would have done 3 of these stumps? Literally, minimal, done 3 of these stumps. Not just tops and bottoms, but all, what is that? 6 sides of it, right? So you're talking about this not doing 2 sides fully, and yet a Freud of mine has lasted through 18 sides of ash before. So the question really is, are these worth it? Well, they can be if you're doing small like pine trim and you just need to do a small job and you know you won't be using these very frequently, or if you're just starting off in woodworking and you're using softer woods, cheaper woods, and you're trying to get familiar with router work and stuff, then yeah, these are worth it. They can be, very much so. If you're doing kind of stuff that I'm doing, where I'm using them to flatten and carve like hard, dense woods that have been sun checked and are dry to a large degree from being outside and sitting for years, then probably not. You're going to want to invest in better tooling. I did recently buy a spoil board flattener, which is a router bit that's 1.5 inches in diameter. Has, I think this one has 4 paddles on it that are carbide that you can turn the different carbide blades on and use 4 different sides on it. It was only 60 bucks, so we'll see how good that is. Some of them that are that same size, once again, 1/4 inch shaft for my router, because that's the size it is. It's a 2 horsepower. I don't know if the 1.5 inch will be a little too big for it. If so, I'll just have to take shallower passes and do it, but that's okay. Some of the 1/4 inch shank by 1.5 inch carbide interchangeable blade spoil board flatteners are like $350. So there are definitely higher end bits that you can buy. Same thing goes Freud. Like I said, I think these are like 30 or 40 bucks for one that's a 1/2 inch or 5/8 inch or whatever by 1/4 inch shank by 1 inch. And these are like 10 bucks a piece or something, 12 bucks a piece. But there are brands out there that are, you know, 120, 200 bucks for a 5/8 by 1 inch by 1/4 inch shank. So I definitely think that you should evaluate how you're using your tools, figure out really like how much you might be using them, and you can always give the cheap ones a go and see what happens. I learned really early on these weren't worth it. I was using these because these are what I had. I do have a couple of Freuds. They're not this diameter. They're actually smaller, so I have to make more passes. So I was hoping these would work better. They didn't, which just, you know, is what it is. So the cheap tools can be worth it, but they can also not be worth it. So let's talk real quick about a few tools that are cheap that I don't think have been worth it in my experience. Harbor Freight or otherwise on Amazon. Once again, these router bits that are super cheap, not really worth it in my opinion, to a large degree. Sandpapers, if you're buying super cheap sandpaper, I found that they typically don't work that well. I don't like them very much. They either like gum up real bad or they leave weird marks in the wood because they're not, like when you run your hand across them, they're not very even. and things like that. Chisels, every cheap chisel I've ever owned, including the DeWalt ones you buy or the Milwaukee ones you buy from Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, don't seem to really be that great of a quality. I do use them for rough work in case I hit knots or whatever that I'm really digging into, and if they chip the chisel tip, I don't care, or glue scraping, whatever. But I do have a set of really nice cherry handles, or cherry chisels from Rockler, I want to say it was, or maybe yeah, one of the woodworking stores, and those are really worth it. They're expensive. They were like $200 for the set of 4, but they've been really good. They hold an edge really well. But I only use those for like final stuff, for like bow tie work and that kind of stuff, or certain kinds of like planing off if I just need to do a little bit of simple planing. So chisels have not been something I've found to be real great. I will say that recently, in the past I wasn't impressed, but recently, due to just finances of not wanting to buy yet another expensive angle grinder, I did buy a Hercules angle grinder, and it did work pretty well. I was pretty surprised with that. I will say that I bought those like spiral detail sandpapers that go on like you screw in a shank to them, and then you put them in your drill or your air grinder or whatever, and you can do detailed work. I've been impressed with those. They've worked really well. I cannot say good things about Harbor Freight's cutoff wheels for metalworking. They've not ever lasted very long. I found that they explode on me quite a bit. Same thing goes for the cheap ones that I buy on like Amazon or whatever. I don't even like the Diablos. I usually buy the Avant or the there's another brand out there and I can't remember the name of it right now, but they're much more expensive and they're worth it. Wire wheels, any of the cheap wire wheels for your angle grinder or drill, they don't last very long. They throw a lot of metal shards into you, and they're just not very good in my opinion. So I always buy like at least Milwaukee brand or Makita brand, but there are some really nice ones at the welding shops that I use. And then, you know, just like basic tools, like some of the wrenches from Harbor Freight I've not been really happy with, and some of them have been fine. I've had a bunch of socket sets and they've been fine, but like, you know, some of their saw blades, like the jigsaw blades, have not been real great. There's just all kinds of stuff. It's just weird. It's a hit and miss deal. So I've kind of learned what I can and can't use from them. I can't stand their gloves. None of their gloves last from like the cheap Chinese brands or Harbor Freight. But you know, that's all just stuff you have to learn. But then again, I've bought some like Milwaukee gloves that didn't last either. So I usually use like Showa is a brand that I use. That's SHOWA. You can buy those on Amazon. Those are one of my favorite. They last a good while for me, and I use those in my tree climbing and arborist company as well. So, you know, but should you buy the Showas at a higher cost of like $7 a pair versus, you know, a cheaper pair of like $3 from Harbor Freight? Well, not if it's just one weekend and you're doing some yard cleanup. Probably not. You might just want the cheaper ones. They might work fine for you. It's just, we're talking about relative value, right? And that's what you have to understand, is that relative value exists. And like I said, if you're gonna make 3 notches in a board, or 6 notches in 2 boards or whatever for some trim work, or clothes hanging rod in your garage or in your house, and you need router bits for it, then Harbor Freight is probably the way to go, versus, you know, spending $40 for one that you might use 6 times and never use again, when these would work fine in a piece of pine trim board or whatever that you're doing from the store for that. So yeah, hope that helps you guys out a little bit. Definitely remember that there is I think there's a balance between your clients just accepting the fact that they're paying for more than what they're really getting in one piece. They're paying for all your time that you haven't sold pieces and all the practice you have and stuff to make your unique style. But I also think that there's a little bit of education that needs to go on about what makes yours different, and that can help people decide to buy your stuff as well. So this is my current piece. I'm going to turn the camera back down a little bit. So this is a big chunk of ash, like I said, weighs about 100 pounds. This is not green as in not dry, but green as in the variety of ash, green ash. And two sides have these organic ripples that I created in them of differing shapes. So it has a texture on both sides. And then it has a nice huge split on this side, which is beautiful. And this side has just these beautiful heartwoods from where this was the main stem here, and then branches were starting to grow off of that, which is very cool, which gives it some super cool character. And you know, ashwood's not super easy to come by for everybody, so it's definitely more glamorous of a wood, not quite as much as like walnut would be, but it's definitely a high quality wood to work with, and it's a beautiful grain structure and whatever when you get done with it. So I have a little bit more to go. I have a couple more hours of sanding to go. To give you perspective on this, by the time I cut this and then I milled it, so mill, and sanding, I'll probably have 5 hours in it, which is a lot of time in this. And honestly, I should be making about $135 an hour for this kind of stuff, but you probably won't, like, there's probably no way I'll sell this for that much. I don't have the name for it yet, so I will probably end up selling it for 250 bucks, and maybe even a little less. I don't know. We'll have to see. It also depends on your market out here. Rustic is king, and rustic often is these guys who usually take a chainsaw, they cut up stuff, and then they take an angle grinder with those resin discs on them and sand them flat, and then they put the thickest varnish or stain plus poly they can find and call it done. And it doesn't look very good in my opinion. It's not very finished, but people call it rustic, and then they would charge 50 bucks for this stump. So you're competing against various markets, just keep that in mind, and that's always a challenge. So you've got to find your market, right? I'm actually going for, I wasn't going to, but I'm actually going for some galleries with some of this stuff, see if I can't get a name out there a little bit. And I don't think I will this year like I had planned, but maybe next year I'll get into some art festivals, and we'll see. I don't know. Art's just furniture building, everything. When you're doing it like bespoke kind of stuff, it's just expensive. It's just hard. That's just the reality of it. It's hard to make a living at it. So this is not my only job, clearly, and so I just do this until I can hopefully make it go, and then I will do the rest until this takes off. So thanks for stopping by and checking it out. I hope you enjoy these live videos. Hopefully you benefited, got some good information out of it or whatnot. I will be posting this to YouTube as a standalone video here after the fact, so any of the comments you've made unfortunately do not carry over. Feel free to go over to my channel and subscribe, and then also like, and if you don't mind, comment and share the videos with those you think might enjoy it. So thanks, take care, and have a good evening. Bye.